Hi friends! Today we talk about darker skin tones. In the previous video that you can find on my Patreon, I talked about the colors that I discovered are very good for darker skin types, and that helped me with the creation of this specific commission right here. Color mixing is very fun, but now you're probably left with the question: how do I apply the color that I created? And that's why here's lesson number 2 to help you understand the mechanics of how to paint darker skin tones effectively and in a realistic way. There are mainly 3 different steps that I follow to ensure a good result, and I've found that this works best for me, even on more delicate papers like Clairefontaine. Mind you, if this is the first time that you paint darker skin tones, maybe you should go for papers on which it's harder to lift the color from, and even if it reactivates, it pretty much stays there. This because it's easier to see on a darker color when the layer reactivates, as it leaves then an ugly effect, and if you use too much water and you risk of lifting the previous colors, it will not look good. So it's something that you don't want. In my opinion, Canson Heritage is a valid option, and I believe that I had the hot pressed one or still something smooth like sateen. Anyway, that's my personal preference since I like smooth paper, but you can also use a hot pressed one. Anyway, let's jump into the lesson. The first step to paint a darker skin tone is to lay the undertones. We talked about the undertones in the previous video, but now we're going to use a sphere and place them so you can also get an idea of how the whole thing works together. Undertones are, in my opinion, fundamental, and it's something that you want to lay down as soon as possible. I work wet on wet, and since I have to do the same process on both the 3 circles, I wet them all. Time to add the undertones, that in the latter process are going to give more depth to the skin. Digital artists have overlay, shine, and other magical effect, but as watercolorists have layering and cussing if something goes irreversibly wrong. The colors that I've layered are yellow, a warm red that shifts towards violet, and blue. These are the colors that I normally place when I paint the skin. Besides, if I want to give a specific undertone, maybe olive, to the complex of the skin. So yellow, where the part is lighter, and blue and violet, where the shadows are supposed to be. Sometimes I also leave the blue part purposefully lighter in the latter process of layering, as I'm a big fan of luminous shadows. With observation during your journey, you'll notice that amongst the shadows there are different values, darker and lighter, and having variety is what makes the difference in your paintings. Anyway, back to the exercise. Mind that I've used a hair dryer to save time and dry the whole paper, but that's something that I will not recommend to you for the first minutes at least, once the pigments settle down. So wait until the paper is damp or slightly lose it, and then you can use your hair dryer or whatever you have. So you'll make sure that the pigment stays there. Alright, step 2. We create our skin tone with the mixes mentioned in the first video, or simply with what color you have, and this time is going to be a dark chalky brown. I wet the whole thing and I apply it like follows, creating an even layer. I repeat the process on the bigger sphere, that is where I'm going to show further techniques for layering the skin. Due to my preferences, I tend to add more pigmentation around the cheeks area, that is represented by the red undertone on the sphere, so that's why you'll see me add more color in the middle. That's also where the shadow is going to be more intense on the sphere, if we imagine that the light is on top, so it makes sense. Once we're done, we'll let it dry a bit, and don't do it like me unless you want to risk the life of your drawing. So please wait until the pigment settles a bit before drying it out completely with the hair dryer. Alright, step 3. Step 3 is the most concerning for most, but it's not going to be for you, as I will explain several techniques to achieve certain effects. Happy? You should. The first technique to layer our skin is wet on dry. Simple as it is, you paint a zone and then blend the area with a damp brush. This technique might work well with certain areas like around the eyes or details that don't require too much work on the paper. Remember that we're trying to not abuse it too much. If you're scared to blend because you fear that the paint below will reactivate, you can simply apply a thin layer of paint and build up your value little by little, which gives a very interesting effect and texture to your portrait. And I'll show you later how to do it, so don't worry. Next technique is wet on wet, and you wet the whole area. Usually I do this for the cheeks and for the parts maybe that I want to shadow. And then you put the paint there simply as it is. This process will result into a smooth blend with no hard edges if done correctly. My advice is to wet a larger area compared to what you plan to paint, because you will leave more room to the paint to flow and blend. Beware not to wet your paper excessively, and same goes for your brush strokes. Try to limit the interaction that you have with it. You have to just give him as gently kisses, not rub the brush against the paper, especially if you're working on a not so good paper. The next one is mixed. So you will have a blended side where it's already wet and an hard edge that's going to be the other side. This is kind of the opposite of the first technique. And I'm thinking about painting certain parts of the nose with this technique. The next is how you build value, by glazing and creating a blend. You start little by little, blending well the first layer, leaving the darker part on the left as shown, and then you add up your value with color on top. The last thing that I want to show you is a thing that I added only recently in my watercolor paintings, and I like to use them from time to time. If you're a fan of mixed media, here's something for you. I discovered pastel pencils and I used the ones from Carandash. I discovered that they work very good to add light accents and make shadows more brilliant. You can add tiny parts of light to the eyes, lips and nose, or eventually you can add the diffuse light too. Mind that if you add too much on top, the layer will smooth out and you will lose the texture, and the difference between where you put it and where you don't shows. So yeah, mind that. The texture will differentiate from the rest of the drawing, so it's not meant to cover up larger areas, in my opinion. But for lighter accents, it's very good. Alright, today we learned a lot of things, it seems, from putting down the first layers of color to the techniques to use later in the process. I also have a demo in which I'll show you how I paint a portrait, so using everything that we learned so far from start to finish, if you're interested, and you can find that on my Patreon. Patreon is a nice way to support me, and in return you'll get to see bonus content for a little price. Says so, if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate if you could leave a like and a comment telling me what do you think, if you found this useful or if you simply want to share your experience with me. We're all here to learn and grow. If you enjoy this type of content, you can also subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so you will know whenever I post. And stop, I've talked enough. Okay, bye bye!